Hey everyone, Ariel Adams here with the Superlative Podcast. Please listen to aBlogtoWatch's other podcast, aBlogtoWatch Weekly, where we chat about the latest reviews and news. My guest today on Superlative is Mr. Mitrajit Bhattacharya from India. Mitrajit, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Ariel. As you can see, I'm sitting in broad daylight. It's about to be noon in India, and I'm sure it's late night in the US, so it's fine.
I was just thinking as we were trying to connect and having some internet issues, how remarkable it is that we can sit down for a conversation and be literally on opposite sides of the world. That's kind of cool still, right?
Absolutely.
The watch industry always envisioned this. And for hundreds of years, starting with the Europeans, they would take their timekeeping items and they would go all over the world, including India. And it's funny because like India has a history of timekeeping going back about as far as there is a history of timekeeping. And it's fascinating how luxury watches have been able to permeate everywhere in the world, even though they're not manufactured really everywhere in the world. Do you ever sort of sit back and think about how interesting it is that this funny industry of luxury watches is truly international?
Yes, it is. And let's jump in with India because I'm in India. India has had actually a very long history with luxury watches. And it started with the British. So when the British East India Company came to India, with them traders, businessmen came, and we got brands, many brands, like some of them you will even see today, like Founder.
Yeah,
I mean, it used to be in the 19th century in India, and it came through, kind of the East India Company officials and traders and businessmen, and that's how we started getting very used to watches, Swiss watches. Having said that, India has had a very checkered history with watches. It's not always been a very steady, I would say, what started with the 1800s. It should have been a much bigger industry by now. But we have our own issues. We've had our own independence movement, and then the country got independence, and then, it has gone through a bit of socialism, and from 90s, when the economy opened, it still took many years for, duties to ease, though it's still on a very, very high side for, so I think there are a lot of headwinds, but I think we are making great progress over the last, 10 years. And let's talk more about it.
I'll tell you something that was interesting to me, which totally makes sense now. But when I first started getting in the watch industry, Asia was like the big growth area, right? Everyone was excited about Asia. And that tended to mean China, but India was always an area where there was anticipated growth. There was the BRIC countries. And of course, just, India is always been seen as having this emergent middle class. And I think that from the United States, even in Europe, it was not clear what was the same or different about these markets, right? Because they were just sort of called emerging markets. Oh, they're all the same. And something that really was interesting to me is when I learned that India, unlike China, has had for a long time a culture of luxury appreciation. Whereas only until recently, apparently, throughout a lot of the ups and downs of recent China, has there been an understanding of high-end goods. Whereas despite your income level in India, there seems to be a remarkable understanding of high-end. It might be different taste or different flavor than other parts of the world, but I guess people point to some of your elaborate wedding ceremonies as being indicative of how deeply ingrained luxury in the culture is. That's that. Would you expand upon that? Like, what do I also still not understand as I say that?
Yes, I get this question very often, particularly from the European and the American press, that is India the next China, how are India, China, similar, dissimilar.
Like
Yeah. So technically, I would say there are some broad differences. I think you've very rightly pointed out one, which is India has had a very strong homegrown concept of luxury. Now I'll break it down to two parts. Let's say look at watches and look at jewelry. Like in Switzerland, because of the Protestant movement and, it took up to watches, but it did not take up to jewelry so much. Similarly,
right.
it's just the reverse in India. Like jewelry is an extremely big homegrown industry where I think it's 99% is Indian jewelers, Indian jewelry, which works, and very few will go for international jewelry which is going to come in. Whereas the watches is quite different. We have some very major players which are Indian players like Titan. But apart from that, and they operate at a certain price point, which is in Indian rupees up to, let's look at the center of gravity will always be less than 50,000 Indian rupees, which is not the price point at which most of the Swiss brands operate. But having said that, obviously Titan is going through a massive premiumization journey. That's a different thing. And if you look at it, it's still going to be the Swiss watches and the Japanese watches which come in. So coming back to China and India, China adopts Western brands as their own. Like they just take them up. So whether it's a Hermes bag or Chanel or Bulgari, it's a straight adaptation of a Western brand. Whereas India, for many product categories, already has a very strong Indian concept of luxury. Like, for example, if you look at designer clothes, couture, we have our own concepts of couture, which is very, very local. We have our own designers, we have our own kind of... So I think that's the first part. And the second part is India. I know you're talking about the famous weddings. India's rich is very rich. And there is a very strong middle class. And then there are the poor. So the rich, if you look at it, and I think that's a number which everybody goes by, number of billionaires, number of very high millionaires, you would see the numbers are very high in India. And it is true that, people who are rich in India, the consuming class for luxury, which is, kind of 100,000 Swiss franc plus products, easily consumable, that's growing, but not at a pace which we would want to. So I think the rich is getting richer, which is the unfortunate part. And hence, you will see the depth of consumption is increasing more than the width of consumption. Let me explain. Yeah. One collector or one watch buyer who used to buy a watch a year is now buying 8 watches a year, 6 watches a year. But that one watch buyer is not becoming 6 watch buyers, unfortunately. So one has become maybe 2, maybe 1.5, maybe 2.5. So I think the challenge for the watch industry, for the luxury industry, is how to tap into more Indians to spend on luxury, apart from the already converted, which is I have bought and I'm steadily increasing. So there are a lot of consumers who are steadily now increasing. I mean, 1 Rolex and now 10 Rolexes, and then they'll hunt it down in the world if they don't have a Patek which they want to have, or the Richard Mille which they don't want to have. So we get this request that, I want this very specific piece. I want to... So, but we should not go with the mark. That's not really the center of gravity, because as I always believe, rich around the world behave in a certain way which is similar. So a rich in San Francisco will behave very similarly with the rich in Mumbai, as in Hong Kong, as in Dubai. So they behave the same. Their pattern of consumption is the same. But Are we really increasing the number of consumers at the pace at which we want in India? I would say no.
And that sounds like a common story in most economies, developed or otherwise, that the rich have more buying power, but there aren't as many opportunities for new people to have that buying power. On a related question, and this is an area I just realized I don't really know the answer to, and I'm curious, what is, and I know it's a big market, but compared to maybe the United States, what are the habits around pre-owned, right? In the United States, there's a very robust market for selling watches and buying pre-owned watches. Europe, maybe not as much, but still big. Obviously, in certain pockets of Asia, Japan, Hong Kong, very big. India, I actually have no idea. Is it a market that likes pre-owned? Is it a market that, for whatever reason, has only likes new? I actually have no idea.
Yeah. So it's a great question. I mean, a fantastic question, Ariel. So let me take it in two parts. So there are two things called service and pre-owned. I feel these businesses come up after a number of years of the first being sold. So technically, if you look at the growth, the boom, what we are seeing in India, and I'll come to the numbers after this question because that's very important to put the perspectives. More watches will come into service after 5 to 7 years of the original purchase. Similarly, more watches will come into pre-owned after, the first. There are enough number of first purchases in the market. So I think if you ask me what's the current situation, it's very ad hoc. It's very, it's not as organized as any of the organized markets you talked about, like the US and the Japan and the Hong Kong. But it's coming up. Like, to give you an example, Tata Click, which is one of the luxury e-com platforms in India run by the Tatas, has started
Tata
a
Click?
pre-owned Tata Click. Yes.
Huh, never heard of it. Cool.
Yeah. And they are the ones who are doing e-com for luxury in India. They have started a pre-owned. Similarly, Ethos watches, which is the largest retailer in India, they have also started their pre-owned. But are we seeing huge transactions there yet? They are all baby steps now. It will take time. So I think the seconds, if you look at a pre-owned, pre-loved, second, whichever way you call it, we have a long way to go. But I think once the market settles down, these are markets which are going to come up. So if you say, is it a good market to be in? It's a pre-owned in watches? Yes. The next 10 years to 15 years, just that market will boom because a lot of people will want to go for their new ones and they want to put their old ones on sale. And I think there needs to be a little more system, little more structure to that market, which currently is not there.
What kind of structure? Are we talking about everything from trusted shippers to watchmakers that can fix stuff located in different parts of the country? Talk about the structure that you actually are referring to.
No, so there are two parts. So the service, I'll come to that later. But I'm saying, as of now, what was happening 5 years back, till about 3 years, 5 years back, most buyers, most sellers of their watches would come to people they know and say, okay, like a lot of them used to come to me and say, I have a Omega which is 30 years old. Can you find a buyer for me? It was a very ad hoc way of dealing with. Like, I don't know whether I will have a buyer for the same watch tomorrow. But now with this, the structured platforms coming up, which is on Tata Click or Ethos, people know that, okay, I can put it up there. They will evaluate it. They will check the conditions of the watch and put it for sale. And I will get a kind of value which I deserve for the same price. And I think more and more you will see people trusting these platforms and putting their watches for resale. So that's one. Service, if you are talking about, yes, I think India has now, most big brands have their own, big conglomerates will have their own service network. And the ones which are kind of independents, kind of one brand company or two brands company, they also have tied up with service centers who are extremely well trained in Switzerland or Japan. and they service those watches. So there are independent players who are taking up watches to service, which is not a part of a big group like the Swatch or a Richemont.
Right. That's interesting. One of the things that we take for granted in America, and I think to a degree Europe, is that your average consumer is relatively open-minded to a new startup business, right? Like there's all these startup watch dealers in the United States, whether they sell new watches or pre-owned or whatever. And we take for granted that the consumer will more or less trust thousands of dollars to a company that has barely been around. And I have long suspected that that's just not true around most parts of the world. There aren't as many consumer rights and things like that. And I suspect that in many places, consumers tend to trust big, old, established names. And I was wondering if there's any truth to that in India, or if you understand that there are parts of the world where, consumers don't have as much trust in the little guy.
So yes, you're absolutely right. In India, retailers and trusted retailers who are in the business for many years play a very key role. Like I know my father used to buy from this same guy in Delhi or Bombay. I would trust, even if you see the market today in India, there are not more than 10 trusted retailers for luxury watches. I'm not talking about the mass or the bridge to luxury watches. Then there are, a lot more retailers. Like just to give you an example, Titan watches are sold through more than 6,000, 7,000 points of sale. So that's a different part of the industry. But when you talk about luxury watches, there would be not more than 10 retail chains across India in a country which is as big as India. So I think they play a very large role. Even the Swiss brands and the Japanese brands and international brands, they also trust the retailers because they know they have handled businesses for many years and they can trust. So as of now, yes, we are seeing a bit of consolidation there as well. Like if you know, Ethos, the largest player in this market, is now a listed company, and they have done very, very well. The stock has done well. They have opened a lot of high-end stores in India. Similarly, if you have Kapoor's, and Kapoor's is in Delhi, Johnson's is in Delhi. You have Art of Time, which is part of your Richemond's network. So you have which is Time Valley. So you have in South again, you have Helvetica, you have Zinsons. So I think there are traditionally there were watch retailers who used to dominate a certain part of India. Like somebody will be from Mumbai, like Rose is Mumbai, Delhi is Johnson Kapoor, Calcutta would be exclusive line. Similarly, Ethos was the only and is truly the only national player, to be very frank. And then for the next level of watches, you have Helios, which is again a part of the Titan group, which again is a major player today for I think a price point which is bridge to luxury, and they are also trying to move up to luxury. So I think Ethos and Helios are two national players, and the rest largely are in pockets which are Delhi, Mumbai, Chennai, Bangalore, south of India, and Calcutta. So I think that's how it is spread. And there is a strong player in Ahmedabad also, which is Golden Time. Yeah.
That's interesting. I'm, again, not nearly as familiar with the geography in the market as you are, but it sounds that there's actually not that much competition, whereas there's very few truly national players like Ethos. But within markets, there doesn't seem to be a dense amount of competition as you'd see in the United States or other parts of Asia. I mean, I think of places in China and Japan where the amount of competing watch stores in the same city is insane. Is India sort of a winner-take-all market where someone who's the leader in an area just sort of gets all the attention? It sometimes seemed that way when I read about the business news.
There can be two different approaches to this answer. One, as I told you, Ethos and Helios are currently across all geographies in India.
Are they direct competitors?
For a certain price point, yes. I mean, then they will go down and up, which is again going to be separate. So that's one. So Ethos pretty much will compete with all these other retailers we're speaking about in each market. Apart from that, the market is today this is the most important part, which I think nobody will publicly see. In India, the buying pattern is very different. In America, a consumer will walk into a retail store and buy. In India, I told you about the depth and the width. You have very few consumers of true luxury. I would say probably, kind of 100,000 Swiss franc and above. But they are buying a lot. So they are very special clients. So,
why won't people talk about that? Where's the secret there?
No, sorry, I didn't get your question.
You said that no one will say this. What is so secret about this information?
I'll come to that. So they don't go to the stores. The stores have to kind of
go to them.
So it's a very different kind of structure because they know they are special. They are very few. So they are treated like very VIP clients. So when you're talking about where there's competition, yes, there is competition because, each retailer would like to hold his own VIP clients.
I see.
Yeah. So it's like, if you tell me, I want to see the watch at 10 p.m. at home, I will go to you with the watch at 10 p.m. So there's a competition which is very differently structured in India. So if I have a client, I will hold on to the client so that he doesn't need to go to anybody else. So I will take care of the watch sale. I will take care of his service. I'm your guy. That's why it's very important to be a key retailer who's trusted by a customer. That anything happens with the watch for the rest of the journey of the watch for the next 30 years, I will just call the guy and say, I need my servicing of my, say, a Rolex. Don't worry, I'll get it picked up. I'll get it done. So it's a very, very service-oriented market, which it's very difficult for someone sitting in the US or Europe to understand that, this kind of servicing what happens in India. But that's how...
Well, it's everywhere in the world, you have this local, cultural elements and the rich expect people that understand exactly what they want and have to cater to them. And like you said, someone in Switzerland is at complete disadvantage to understand what this person wants, but someone that lives in their neighborhood, of course, knows what they want. That's, I think a very interesting element there. And I also think that it conflicts with this corporate idea that stores will come in, have their own distribution in a country, have their own stores and collect all the margin. I guess while they could do it theoretically, I have really never seen a brand, corporate owned or otherwise, replace that type of almost family-like relationship that your jewelry dealer, your watch dealer has, not just coming to your home at night and showing you product, but, remembering your kids' birthdays, showing up to events, buying you gifts, getting you tickets to some cultural thing. Brands can try to fake it, but I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't think that the groups could ever replace that type of treatment, that type of service.
It can't because, the relationship is very strong with the retailer. I'll tell you why. Or people who are guiding a watch buyer with his collection. Say, for example, I know clients, I know his or her collection over the last 10 years. So if there's a request, often it starts with, what do you think about this one? I know how to guide that person. So I can tell him that, you picked up a skeleton or something, or you don't have a minute repeater in your collection. Why don't you look at a charming watch? This kind of information is, obviously they will have a couple of or 3-4 brands in consideration set, but it always starts from what do I need to collect? And you will find often people, the general criteria is always the same around the world, that, whether I want a sporty watch, whether I have a very big wrist, whether I want a classic watch. Apart from those things, which is obviously very defined by personal taste, often the customer is seeking information which is brand agnostic. And that's where the retailers come in, and they kind of advise their long-term clients that, what should be your next purchase, what's coming up, so it's like they do a lot of online search as well. But the retailer's voice and the suggestion is very, very important for this client. So that relationship is very, very important.
I think you're mentioning something so important. And again, we see it all over the world. And, it's someone like myself and you that like watches. We spend a lot of our time hunting.
Yeah.
We're reading, we're sorting through stuff. It's as though we like to look through crap to find the good stuff, right? Like we enjoy that behavior. But I recognize that there's a lot of people out there that like watches, but don't like hunting through watches.
Yeah.
They want a trusted person that knows their taste, that says, you know what, I'm doing all the hunting. I'm looking through all the stuff for you. I looked through the 1,000 new watches that came out this year. Here's the 5 that I think you'll like. And there's value associated with that, because there's a lot of these people have more money than time.
Yeah.
And maybe they like watches, but it's not their hobby. Maybe their hobby is doing something else on the internet. They like wearing nice watches, but the idea that there's someone who is motivated through commissions to keep coming to you and flattering you and making you feel good and giving you options, that's a nice way of being a watch lover, other than the countless hours that people like us spend rating press releases, putting stuff on. Because according to the brands, it's all amazing, and you can't trust price points. You can buy an amazing watch for $5,000, or you can buy a horrible watch for $5,000 today. That's a real thing, right? So, would you agree that explains it?
I will just take a minute here. It's not just about the collection. Like for example, I know a client, some of my, people I consult. If you have, say, more than 20 good automatic watches, I know it's time for him to invest in a watch finder. So, typically they will say, oh, that's a good idea. Which watch finder should I take? 8, 4, 16. So I think it's not, or strap. Now I have found people, or I know people who have kind of spent 15 years collecting. They are now talking about these things that, the moment I get the watch, I need 3 straps, can we design? So they are no longer. I've also seen the progression of clients, customers, collectors, who now understand a lot more. And let me tell you, I learn every day from them as well. More than probably I read through thousands of press releases. I'm learning from them. They say, why not this? There are brands which are independents in Japan or Switzerland, which I have come to learn from them because they have found it. A lot of them, I don't want to name a few, but there are so many of them. When I first came to know about the brand is from a collector who I probably deal with. So I think that's very interesting process. It enriches people like us. It's not just we are enriching them and they are buying. Every day we learn from them.
This is a good time to talk a little bit about, what you actually do in watches and how you got into this. I guess my first question is, you mentioned interacting with collectors. What is your preferred forum? Do you go to groups? Do you have a chat group? Where do you meet these collectors, and how often do you have these types of conversations?
Very interesting. India is a very private business. As I told you that, you need to have your client guarded. And, while you have some watch collectors, watch lovers groups now in India, the ones who really buy and have a very long-term steady relationship with you are all personal connections. And through word of mouth, each of these, because these are people with immense, I would say they're opinion leaders. They're key opinion leaders. So they have people around them who they influence. And, you will typically find from 10 people to 100 people, and they're talking to you all the time. They're WhatsApping you. Because we have seen them. So I think it's more of a personal network of clients who you advise and deal with. And for me, that's not my core business, because everything we work through retailers, apart from very few brands which work with you directly. But otherwise, we've always worked through retailers in India because that's the best way to do it. So we just advise. But it's a very, very enriching, as I was telling you, it's a very enriching experience to work with these very knowledgeable collectors who challenge you all the time. That, if this is there, how do I get it? Is this a good piece? Why not? So I think there are a lot of conversations which we have, which I also don't know, it may or may not convert into any sale. So it's not so much exactly sale oriented as a retailer would have for tomorrow, because he has to have the watch in place to sell. But I think it is developing these clients in a medium term and a long term to be true collectors. And as going back to the India's habit of collecting well, which is art, watches, there are a lot of very good collectors in India now who really understand and not just get swayed by what is being written about in the last blog by Ariel Adams. So it's
a very diverse market.
Yeah, it's a diverse. But again, any market which is new will go for the known brands. That's how it works. Once they're done with the kind of the Rolexes and the Omegas of the world, is when they will move up and try to see what is different. Then they'll go to independents. Then they'll go to brands which are very, very kind of selective and not so numbers. So India is going through that transition as well. I mean, if you're looking at, okay, let me give you I was telling you that we should talk about the numbers a bit as well. India, over the past 2 years means I'm taking Jan, September this year, because we don't have the full year. So I'm just going through the figures of Jan, September, Swiss watch exports versus Jan, September last year. And the whole of last year versus whole of last to last year. If you see 2023, as we all know, was a phenomenal year for the watch industry. Big markets like US growing. India grew by 44%, 44.4% last year, 42.4% last year, last to last year. Over last to last year. And these 7 months, we are again growing at 25%. So technically, if you look at it, over 2 years is 25% and last year was 44%. It's the highest growth among the top 30 markets in the world. But it's very small. If you actually look at the Swiss watch exports in 9 months this year, it's only 188 million Swiss. Whereas if you actually see the US market, you're talking about 3,100 million Swiss. So it's a very small market, but still growing at this kind of pace will take us somewhere. And we are galloping in terms of the ranks. As you see, over the past 5 years, we're now in a respectable number rank-wise. If you see worldwide, I think the second country, again, which is good in growth is Mexico. And if you look at it, US has been phenomenal for the last 2 years, because even if you see on a large base, they've grown fantastically well. The only Japan has been growing again in last 2 years phenomenally well. The only problem has been China, and associated China, the problem is Hong Kong. If you actually take these two markets away, which unfortunately are the number 2 and number 3 last year, so it's not so easy to just take them away, because if you take them away, you're talking about a large part of your revenues completely going down. That's where the problem has been. So if you look at the Asian market, Korea, Japan, India, they have all done very, very well. It is just the China, Hong Kong phenomenon. And China, Hong Kong, China, if it suffers, then the European market also faces a problem because a lot of it is Chinese tourists buying in Europe. So you will typically see the moment the Chinese economy is stuttering, you will find the European sales affecting. So that is what is happening. France is the only exception in the last 2 years because it also got a little bit of positive energy from the Olympics and everything. But I think Germany is a bit down. UK, Singapore, I'm talking about the top 7. UK, Singapore has been flat, which is okay. It's nothing major to worry about. US has been super. China, Hong Kong has been down. Japan, Korea, India, very good. Mexico, very good. So I think these have been the overall numbers point of view. This is where we are. In India, within that, if you see the Lux market, Rolex and the Swatch Group will easily be more than 60% of the market. So again, that gives you a perspective.
Yeah. And thank you for sharing all that about the more global market for watches. This is quite deep in the trenches in terms of interest. I love this stuff. It's obviously crucial because it's our industry. And I think what Mitrajit is trying to say is that an uplift in India isn't going to necessarily offset the down market in China, both mainland China and Hong Kong, because that represented such a higher volume. And what we always are looking for is money going back to Switzerland, because unless there's money going to Switzerland and France, in some other areas, there isn't consumer confidence there. They don't have investor confidence. They're not going to invest. And we like to see them invest so that they can further get more brands into more markets, more retail, more advertising, more marketing, and things like that. I suspect that in India, like the United States, there's those big cities that have the established luxury markets, but there's all these other places where a lot of rich people are, but they just don't have access to watches. They don't have the culture that even just a little bit of investment in these pockets would actually yield good results, because these are virgin markets, so to say.
Very, very valid point. But let me also take you to, it's going to be very complex to explain India in a podcast of one eye. It's just very complex. But I'll just put this in perspective.
We like watches. We're sort of into complexity, aren't we, Mitrajit?
Yes,
we love this complexity.
India,
anytime we can.
But India is a very complex market. So when we talk about the sale, say, for example, in a retail store in Delhi, or I'll take another example which will make you understand this better. If you see people flying out of Delhi airport, they are not all from Delhi. That's the first thing. They are from Punjab. They are from Haryana. So it's these cities actually are catering to rich and affluent around that city from different states and different parts as of now. So Mumbai would be typically getting a lot of buyers from Maharashtra, a lot of buyers from, which is where there are very big cities. Currently, they keep coming to Mumbai and they have their own families here, and they're just, kind of. The brands are now in that situation, or in that, I would say, they're thinking whether investing in retail in these cities, which are the next tier 2, tier 3, would make financial sense for them, because these customers are anyway getting catered. They're being catered through the retailers in the big cities. While if you see brands like Rado, which is you have no idea how big Rado is in India. In fact, is the biggest market, which worldwide it's not such a big brand, but in India it's like a huge brand. They are available through like many cities in India. So like a Tissot or a Rado or they're available through retail points across India. I guess more and more brands which are slightly higher up will also start getting into those markets. But I will give you a good example. I was talking to the Mobley India MD very recently, and he was telling that, this Tata Click example of e-commerce, they have got amazing success, because that is also helping clients who don't have a physical retail point in their cities to access these products through e-com. And in a way, it's helping. I'm not saying it's going to be a major volume, people buying luxury through e-com, but it is a steady increase. And coming back to my point, why even if the numbers of India is still not that large, it is now everybody is trying to look at India very seriously. We have already had visits of the Brighton CEO earlier this year. We have had visits of Panerai CEO earlier this year. We are hearing that Frederick Arnold is also going to make a visit early December to India. So there is a like palpable, I would say, excitement around India in real terms, because I think every brand would want to recalibrate a bit of their efforts between China and other markets, because some of them were over-invested in China and have suffered with the economy tanking. They have tanked as well. So there is a serious interest in seeing how India should be handled differently. Like many of them are looking at aggressive plans of building a lot of EVOs, so I think we have our own issues, but as far as the global interest is concerned, it is the right time for the brands to recalibrate a bit of China-India equation right now.
Thank you for explaining all that. I think that it's so interesting to get into talking about confidence and things like that in politics. I want to actually move into that because I think that one of the interesting things that I've been thinking about recently is just how connected the luxury industry is to global politics. Different emotions stimulate luxury habits in vast ways, which is kind of ironic because like when you and I go to events like the luxury shows, Watches of Wonders, or in the past Basel World, they've gone to great lengths to make sure you have no idea what's going on in the outside world, right? Like you might as well be like on a cruise or a ship to the moon or something like that. But the reality is that all kinds of decisions in the industry, whether it's to invest in a new product or to purchase that product, has a lot to do with what your feelings are about the economy. And that's ultimately a political question much of the time. And what I've noticed is that India is not the only place, but one of the exceptions these days where a lot of people are optimistic. And they're optimistic because of political reasons and conversations. Mr. Modi, for his ups and downs, has been quite the champion of India. And the average, Indian, my understanding, I mean, I don't go around and poll people, but definitely you and other of our colleagues that do work or live in India have been quite bullish about things, which is great. And so I wonder that if a lot of the reason to be excited about India is less to do with the nuts and bolts and more to do with the fact that there's a lot of people out there who are optimistic, because people are optimistic about the future. They buy far more luxury goods than people who are pessimistic about the future. And in Europe, for example, you have a lot of people who are not particularly optimistic about the near term. But in India, a lot more people are. And I think that that's why the luxury industry and politics are so much more intertwined, because the sentiment has everything to do with how serious both the luxury industry and consumers take luxury. I'd love to hear your reaction to all that.
I think it takes me back to April when you and I were at the Rolex party and we were discussing about Mr. Modi. And you're very right. And, one thing you have to give it to him that he has given us a very stable, I would say he's in his third term. And it's a very stable government. And it's without a coalition now. It is all very strong. His party is very, very strongly in control. He is in control. So, yes, it's a very stable environment where you don't feel very uncertain about either the short term or the long term. And you are absolutely bang on that. Buying luxury is not about whether you have money or not. It's about how you feel during the day or during the month or that year. So I think because if money could buy luxury, India would be 10 times or 20 times the volume right now. So it's not about money. Yes, we are very, very positive about a lot of things in the country. And if you see also, the economy today is fairly stable. The stock markets are still giving very good returns. Most of the basic industries are kicking in with numbers which are not of much of concern. And I will also take you to a very different point where if you see globally, investment options are coming down for international brands because much of the world is troubled today. If you look at it, many parts, and that happens when we fly from India today. You'll be very surprised to know the same flight which used to take 8 hours today, sometimes it's taking 9.5 hours because your flying routes are compromised. You can't fly through this country, that country. That also tells you about how troubled those countries sometimes are. That you can't even fly on through your regular route. So what is happening is, what are the options today? There are very few options. You have a problem, which is China is not kicking in, and that's a fact. I mean, whether you like it, not like it, it's a fact. There are ongoing wars happening across the world. I mean, if you see, many parts of the world are today, you're talking about mood, sentiment, economy. Just imagine countries being drawn into full-fledged wars and bombings. I mean, you are talking about very few parts of the world which are today stable and having, I would say, sensible and sensitive investment environment. So, if you look at it, India today ranks very high on that scale. So, I have to grow. Like, you think of a CEO who's sitting in Switzerland. He has to grow his business. Where all will he go? I mean, how much can he go to US? It's already a very, very large market. Europe, in the short term, as you're rightly saying, it's a very aging population. It's very tourist-driven market. You can't really expect much to change in Europe immediately, right? It's a very old economy. It is going to take its own time. We don't. Japan, yes, though again, they've managed it well in the past couple of years. That's one. Korea is again Japan, Korea. These are few pockets which are doing well. Yeah, I mean, you have Mexico, you have Brazil. So there are not too many opportunities today in front of them to either maintain their numbers or grow. Because this year, if you see the forecasts, I think the industry will be down by about 6% in revenues or 7% in revenues by end of 2024 over 2023, which is after many years, because post-COVID, it has been only a golden run because everybody came back with, revenge shopping and buying and kind of YOLO, and, everybody was into. Look at the escalations of Rolex prices. People were making money out of everything. Will stabilize.
I've seen that as a bubble period that needed to normalize. I'm happy that's no longer going on. Yeah. I think the challenge, especially for people like us that are interested in the business side of it, is we know all the unknowns. We are so precisely aware of all those factors that contribute to low investor confidence. Wars, probably the top of the list, right? And there's a bunch of them right now, a lot. Then you have economic outlook, which of course is a different thing, but related to that. And then you have taste. Which part of the world do I want to focus on? What types of consumers do I want to flirt with? And when you are in these groups or just the brands, trying to make sense in those areas right there. I mean, it's like, what do you make? Who do you intend to buy it? What's it supposed to look like? Where are you going to sell it? And for how much? And that's just too much for most of these business people to answer. That is just given what's going on right now, that overwhelms them. That's just too much gambling right there. And I get it. You know, you and I are sometimes fortunate. We just get to comment on the watches that they end up coming out with. We can make fun of it. We can love it. But, you know, it's a hard thing. I can imagine it to have to sit there and be like, I know I need to make some new products next year. But wow, I don't know who's going to buy it or what or anything like that, right?
There is one more big problem which we are not addressing, which is my favorite currency in the world, which is Swiss franc. So what's happening is when I started traveling to Switzerland early 2000s to cover the industry, Swiss franc to Indian rupees used to be about, I think if I remember correctly, about 32 rupees to 1 Swiss franc. Now It is 100 rupees to 1 Swiss franc.
Wow.
And you know it, not only Indian currency, Swiss franc has, you know, kind of, if it's not controlled, and largely it's controlled, they have relationships with ECB and other European banks too, because it's a very strong currency. And large part of the problem today is luxury is outpricing itself. And if you see the problem, large part of the problem of that outpricing also comes from the fact that Swiss franc is uncontrollable in terms of the conversion rate. So technically, a watch has become just very expensive. And I think as an industry, the industry has to figure out that how do you keep the consumer sentiment high, give high quality product, I'm not recommending devaluing or, you know, kind of reducing prices, which will affect the collectors who have, you know, kind of picked up yesterday or day before yesterday. But there is a way as an industry has to figure out how do you price your product, because if you genuinely see the products have become very expensive. Right?
I agree. We talk about this constantly. But you know what people aren't necessarily talking about? Who's winning here? Yeah. People love to talk about the brands, the Pateks, the APs, whatever, that push it up high. But you know what? Not a lot of people are talking about who's doing really well. And they have their own PR issues, by no doubt. But the Swatch Group brands. A lot of the Swatch Group brands, especially the Tissot's, Hamilton's, Longines, they've been coming out with some of their most affordable, well-priced watches ever. There is if you find the right Swatch Group watch, there's a huge amount of value in there. They're not amazing about communicating it, but I've seen enough of them. And like, I wish they said to me like, hey, Ariel, I want you to know this is a good watch for the money, but they don't. I'm just like, wait a minute. That's good for the money. Like they don't even say it. I have to discover it, but there is some of that going on. So I think that there's hope, and those people that are doing that, they're greedy. They're just being greedy.
Yeah. I think that's what I wanted to bring in this discussion today, that there is a conscious, and it's not just watch industry. It's happening with handbags. It's happening with leather. It's happening with allied luxury products as well. Where people, it's also linked with the sentiment thing we were talking about. People are suddenly questioning themselves: is this the right? Is this the right price to pay? I mean, in the sense, and so I think there has to be a new consciousness about pricing it right, giving that confidence back to consumers that they are buying true value for the price they are paying. How each brand will play the game is a different thing. Yes, you are right.
You're right.
When the days are good for the brands, they are enjoying, and they will not bring this at all in discussion. But it is going to pinch them sometime in future if they don't address this issue right now.
I mean, I've said, just cutting to the chase, up to 30% of the brands that exist right now will not in 15 years' time. And that's okay. Brands come and go. Yeah. People always like a good resurrection. But they're increasing their prices because they know they need to sell less watches and they don't want to make any less money. Yeah. Sometimes they can get away with that. Sometimes they can't. And they're sticking it to the consumer. They're basically saying, because I can't sell as many, you need to pay more for the same thing. Yeah. And the good news is it's a highly competitive market. There's the wonderful micro brand, enthusiast brand, whatever you want to call it. And that's happening all over the world, including India. And these are examples of what you can get away with at a few $100s or a few thousand, that you don't need to spend $10,000 on a watch that, you and I remember when that watch was like $4,000 or less. And It's like $10,000 now. We're like, that was and they're thinking, they're like, as you said, the money's going deeper, not going wider. So that same guy or gal who used to spend $5,000, maybe they don't care to spend double the amounts on the same thing because they're so much more wealthy. So that's like the calculus they make, but it rubs us really the wrong way. And I think you're right. The consumers that buy watches for long enough are going to get really hip to it. I want to ask you, when you go to the shows and you report on the watches, you obviously don't talk about everything. You select a few, and I imagine a lot of it is what you, Mitrajit, personally likes. But I guess that's the question. After a show like Watches and Wonders, you see hundreds of watches, maybe only a dozen or a few dozen you write about. How do watches get on your list to be covered in your content for your audience?
It's a very good question, Ariel. I mean, I think it's only someone like you can ask, because it's very, very important that I tell every brand that, however hard-nosed we are about reporting a certain industry like watches, we also have a heart. And we also have our own personal biases, likes and dislikes. I mean, and it's very important. That's why to actually first get into the heart of key journalists for a brand, because if I like Cartier, and I'll find 500 ways to convince you that it's a good brand. And if I don't. I mean, it's very difficult. So I think, however much objective we want to be, first there is a level of subjectivity. So I think that's the first thing I want to make it very, very clear, that it's not like, everything is 100% objective. It doesn't work like that. Second point, bigger brands have better relationships. So there's a possibility that you will get swayed by that relationship to at least go and figure out those brands first. So that's the second part. So you have your own biases, your own likes, dislikes, and then you will tend to go with the more known brands, because if you don't report on them tomorrow, you'll be questioned saying, oh, you didn't see the latest release from IWC or Rolex. So I can't do that. But I can possibly say that, no, I didn't have time to go and see an independent who was in the first floor, and I've skipped it. So that's the second. And third is obviously, which is on merit. If there is somebody who has come up with a foregone minute repeater, or somebody who has come up with a crazy design, I have to feature, which is very, very, it's not subjective at all. It's quite objective. Having said that, that's why when we met end of August, I remember for Geneva Watch Days, I quite like, actually, the pressures are less. You go and check out some very, very beautiful small brands from different parts of the world, which probably the world doesn't know. And you feel that, you are responsible to take their story forward to your readers' base. Like, for example, there is a Micro Milspec, or there is a Bosel. There is these are brands which are not big. They are not expensive. People don't know. Even if you see their Instagram handle, it's not that they are followed by millions. So, but they make good watches. They make interesting timepieces. So, Watches and Wonders, there's a pressure. There's a pressure. There's a pressure to cover the cream first. Just be very, very honest about it. We have limited time. You are being hosted there. There is a certain pressure to cover the more important brands, and I think they make the significant launches. So it's time well spent. Whereas when you go to Geneva Watch Days kind of fair, where it's your time to explore and find out what's sticking with you, in terms of the brand. So I think we have our own ways. Like when you go to the other fair during Watches and Wonders, which is at the head, you again find out smaller brands, more experimental brands, independent. That's where you talk about what you like. Like if you like a Menase somewhere, if you like some, see you can pick up what you like. But Watches and Wonders, serious business, big brands, big launches. That's our duty to first tell the world, because I'm asked immediately that what did Rolex launch? Just let us know, we are waiting. So I think you balance it out.
Yeah, that makes sense. We have time for one more question, and this is a business question. And we wanted to talk about business because you're a business guy, and I guess we'll have to do the next conversation. But for now, your statement got me thinking about an issue, and this is not with all media, but with most media, and that is that the current business model of media that covers watches is such that, like you said, you really only have the bandwidth to cover the quote-unquote important brands that people expect to see coverage of, and there's less bandwidth for you to cover the stuff that you want to cover. And so the question is this: what kind of business model will facilitate more media to be exploratory? And let me explain a little bit before you answer. The big brands are more threatened than ever of the little ones. So they don't want to fund or somehow underwrite, subsidize media covering something other than them. They're that territorial at this point. So media needs to get money from another way. These little brands themselves don't necessarily have the money to advertise. They have energy and they smile a lot, but they can't necessarily afford to do that. They can, it's like just one man often at a booth. Does he have staff? Can he buy a big advertising budget? No. So the question is, and I'm not saying there's an obvious answer, maybe there isn't, but you've been doing this long enough to think about it. How can watch media, other than selling watches, which doesn't turn into media, how can they provide the service to consumers about covering what they expect to see and also covering what you've discovered, but they didn't expect to see because without you showing it to them, they don't know it exists?
I've kind of answered this in my previous answer. We need to do both. See, it's our responsibility to write about something from however small the brand is. If they have done something like if somebody has come up with 1,000-hour power reserve, it's my duty to tell people, and I have never faced any pushback by big brands for writing about small. I have to give it to them. They've never said that you can't write about a smaller independent. While they are more concerned about whether you have written enough about them, I have to give it that they have never been unfair about us covering anything what is not from their kitty. So that I think you need to balance. You need to have, because see, I'm not even talking about the money pressure. I am talking about, let's face it, what are your consumers concerned with? In India, at least, they're concerned with the big brands. Because most of the small brands are not available in India. They're not really that interested in the small brands. So they are still interested in what is coming from, the big players and the Cartiers and the Rolexes and the Omegas and the, kind of Tudors of the world. So that's what you first need to take care of. In a market like India, I'm not talking about a very advanced watch market in Europe, which kind of knows all these brands and they want to know more about what's coming up in a village in Scandinavia or somewhere else. No, in India, the priority is still the big brands because that's where the interest lies, and there is no pressure from them that you cannot cover. That's why I'm saying we balance it out. If you like something spectacular happening from any of the independents, I think we must give them a window because that's what we owe to our audience. Having said that, in India, again, there are two types of media which cover watches. One is a watch media, like for aBlogtoWatch is a watch media. Whereas there are also players which are larger, very large, larger media houses, which cover watches as a part of their overall lifestyle and luxury, I would say, presentation. And I think they are looking at more, I would say, massier approach, because they will have a lot more readers where you need to be little more easy and not make it very complicated. Whereas the watch media, you need to be always top of your game as far as what's the latest and what's difficult and what's the easy part, more analytical, more complicated for your audience, because they are very, very aware. So I think I also, when I write for different publications, I try to keep that in mind, that who are you writing for? If it's for a large newspaper, then, you have to make it more, kind of for a larger audience, which is slightly simpler.
No one I know has been covering the watch industry in India as long as you, Mitrajit. So thank you for doing that. We're out of time. Would you please let everyone know where they can learn more about you or see your work on the internet?
Thank you, Ariel. I think it's been a pleasure talking to you. I know we first met in Japan more than, I think, around 20 years back. And since then,
it's been a while.
Yeah, since then we have been meeting each other in different parts of the world, attending different events. Yes, currently you can see my work in a magazine called Outlook Lux, in a newspaper called The Hindu, in a portal called czest.com, and many, many other publications. So I think if you Google me by my name, most of the stories will come up, and hope to keep all of you well informed about the watch industry for years to come. Thank you, Ariel, for the opportunity, and hope to see you soon.
This has been the Superlative Podcast interview with Mitrajit Bhattacharya. Mitrajit, thank you so much.
Well.